Hi, I'm Helen.
And I'm Sarah.
And this is the Squiggly Careers Podcast, a weekly show where we talk about the ins, outs, ups and downs of work to give you a bit of insight, support, advice and some tools to help you feel a little bit more confident and in control of your career. And as well as the episode, which Sarah will tell you what we're going to be talking about today in a moment, we also create lots of extra things to help you with your development. So you can download our PodSheet, which is a one-page summary of what we're going to talk about today, and you can also get a swipeable summary. All of those resources are either on our LinkedIn page, which is Amazing If, so just head there, or on our website, which is amazingif.com.
So interesting topic, which I think we're going to have a bit of fun with today. How to make small talk. And in workshops, I often ask people a bit about networking, which we define as people helping people. But before I share that definition, I say, how do you feel about networking? And often unprompted, people will tell me about their hatred of small talk.
So emotive.
And people are quite kind of visceral in their reaction to just the kind of the dread, the anxiety. And actually when you talk to people about kind of what is it about networking that gets in your way, I feel like small talk is sort of almost like the biggest barrier. Like that's the hurdle that people can't get past. So they're like, well, I'm never going to network because I hate small talking. I hate any kind of small talk.
I actually really like small talking. I find it fun because my approach to it is I'm always thinking, I never know who I'm going to meet or what we're going to talk about. But I do, as somebody who kind of enjoys it and sort of just leaps into it, I suppose, I do sometimes see the person that I'm speaking to being far more resistant. Like, I definitely sometimes, because I just start a chat with anybody, at any event, anywhere. Big events, I feel a bit more awkward. That's probably the only one where I'm like, take a deep breath before I do it. But almost in every other situation, like start of a Zoom, in a meeting room, that kind of thing, I'm fine with that stuff. But I do sometimes see the person on the other end of my small talk might be starting in a different place from me. Like you can see like just a little bit of like, like that, what's it, they would say deer in the headlights kind of phrase, just a bit like, what, that kind of feeling. Where are you on a scale of small talk is amazing to small talk is the most awkward thing that I could possibly do in my day? Where would you be?
Well, I think as we will talk about, I think I'm in a very different place now to where I would have been pre-Amazing If, because it is unavoidable in the work that we do. I think I've had an awful lot of practice now, which has made me find a way of having those kind of small talk conversations that works for me. And actually, when you and I have sort of gone through it today and kind of come up with our ideas, we both actually came up with quite different things. I think probably because of my more introverted personality, you're more extroverted. Already just listening to you, I'm like, well, you do that. You've got that dream lens on these conversations, which is, you're like, great, I just approach all these conversations with curiosity. And you're like, oh, what can I learn? And who am I going to meet? Which I think in theory is, of course, the right way to do it. But in practice, if that's not you, I don't think telling yourself is going to help that much. I don't think just going, I'm just going to be more curious. You're like, no, I think you have to almost like do a bit of a rethink about kind of what this looks like for you so that you can take the fear and the anxiety and the dread away. And the reason we want to talk about it today is when we started listing all the moments when small talk happens, you realise I think it's more frequent than maybe most of us imagine at first glance. Because what do we all think about when it comes to small talk? Events where you don't know people. And that's true. That's often a kind of almost like a spiky moment of small talk. You're like, crikey, there's going to be a lot of it. But any kind of meeting someone for the first time, so that could be internally as well. So, you're meeting someone from a different team, from a kind of different department. Start of most conversations, there's often at least a bit of small talk. When you're maybe doing things like team meetings, there's usually a bit of small talk. And like I was saying, filler time. So, and particularly I think if you're doing virtual meetings, actually even in meetings where you're all in a room, there's always that like couple of minutes between like getting everybody there and like basically before you start the kind of real purpose of what you're there to do, there's always that bit of small talk. There is the moving between contexts small talk. So we were saying if you mainly work virtually and then actually you're doing something in a room together, then actually I feel like you probably have a different small talk conversation then, or you're on an away day where maybe you're like, oh, it feels like I should make some small talk because I'm sort of on an away day. And then we got to the small talk that neither Helen or I like. So I was like, crikey, if Helen doesn't even like this, it must be bad. The lift small talk. So we were both saying, we both worked in companies with lots of floors. I mean, maybe this is a really specific thing, but where you do see people that you sort of either half know or know a bit in a lift, and you're like, I've got 2 floors. Like, what do I do?
I know, because I think it's the pressure of how, I think because you get in and you're like, well, I've got 3 floors, but maybe you get on the first floor. So I can't start a conversation that you're like, see, so I'm just not going to have it. And then where do you look? So do you, like, it's nice coffee.
It's so
like,
awful.
awful.
Well, also, I had ones that had mirrors. So you could see everyone's face, and I would just be like, look at the floor.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, look at your shoes.
Though honestly, I was saying I think I couldn't do this in one of the companies I worked in because there were too many floors. There were like 31 floors. But in where there was only 8 floors, my answer to this was take the stairs. Honestly, I reckon sometimes I was just like, oh, it is as easy to walk up 2 flights of stairs. That is easier than making small talk with someone I half know, where I don't know if I've got like 1 stop or 2 before I have to get out, and you're just like, oh no.
No, I agree.
That I
don't love the lift.
would dread. So I suppose the point we're trying to make is there are lots of moments of small talk, and maybe if we can think about it in a different way, it can actually be a chance to connect. So we were sort of trying to almost like forensically look at small talk and go, well, what is it that kind of makes small talk? And we were like, it's quick. So we're not talking about big long conversations here. We're like quick conversations that tend to be the start of something. So it's like kind of it's the first thing that you're talking about, which often is, I think, why it's hard, because like the pressure, it's like the first thing I say, and it's usually preempting something else. So it's never like, that's never the kind of core content of a conversation. It's like, it's quick, it's the first thing you do, you're getting started and you're preempting. So we were trying to do a bit of a squiggly swap, and you'll have to let us know if you come up with something better, but we were thinking, what would a reframe be that might help you approach these conversations kind of with a different lens, with a different mindset? And we came up with this idea of quick connection. So this is a moment of quick connection. And as part of that, I think you also have to let go of the expectation that you will connect with everyone. Basically, your aim is you're like, oh, I'm just going to see if I can make a quick connection with someone. Sometimes people don't want to be connected with. Sometimes you might just not. You know, like I feel like sometimes like chemistry in those moments just doesn't click. And that doesn't mean that someone doesn't like you or that you're not good at your job. You know, it's a quick connection and then you sort of move on. And I think for lots of people, probably people a bit like me, actually just sort of going, look, it's a bit like I think some people have to let go of networking as a word, because I think sometimes that just gets in the way. If this idea of networking and small talk, you're like, it just feels so hard and so far away from who I am and how I am, I would maybe start with, okay, people helping people and quick connections. I do think that kind of helps sometimes with just how we then take action, like give ourselves a bit of impetus to do something different.
And we did talk about as well this idea of connections, sort of the difference between small C and big C connection. So making a quick connection through small talk does not mean they become an actual connection, as in suddenly they're my best friend or somebody that I'm, you know, having another meeting with, or I'm on LinkedIn. It's more the sense of I've found, like Sarah mentioned the word chemistry, there's a moment of chemistry in this conversation where we have connected, and we'll talk about ways that you might find that connection. But it's just a moment in time where we just clicked at the start of a conversation. So it isn't like a quick connection that, you know, results in us being LinkedIn best buddies. It's not that kind of a connection. It's just this moment at the start of a conversation where we've had that quick click, that kind of moment of kind of interaction that has just felt, you know, it's felt engaging, it's felt interesting.
So as Helen and I were saying, so we do loads of this every week. I would say more than average, just because of the sorts of work we do. We work with loads of different companies. We're meeting new people all the time. I reckon most days I'm now meeting someone that I've not met before. So later today, like I'm doing a podcast interview ready for something special that we're doing in March. And again, I'll be meeting those 2 people for the first time. So whether it's podcasts or workshops or speaking, we just have a lot of that in our weeks. And so what we've tried to do now is list what's helped us do it well and also what hasn't. And actually, as we kind of discovered as we went through, yes, there were some principles that we both agreed on, but actually our practices, kind of what you would see if you were a fly on a wall in our weeks, would be different. And what I hope that kind of makes the point for everybody listening is going, well, there's not one way of doing this, but whether you're more introverted or more extroverted, there is sort of a way for everyone. So we're going to try and do some contrasting options. So the first area is what we're calling small talk starters. So, like the first thing you're going to say. And Helen and I both approach this in this kind of slightly different way. So I am much more likely to start with what we're calling a low commitment question. So this idea of being interested and worry a bit less about being interesting. I feel like that takes the pressure off me a bit. And I think I find questions are just a good way to be intrigued, to show somebody also that I'm interested. And actually, once I've got a response, one of the things I think I am quite good at is then connecting the connection dots. Like once someone has given something to me, I can then start to be like, oh, okay, so that's interesting. They're obviously into this or they're into that. And then I can work out what does that mean for me. So those low commitment questions, which I think change depending on your context. So kind of you meeting someone for the first time or are they people you already know? But a few examples. I might just ask something like, oh, what have you been up to since I last saw you? Or what's new since last week? That's kind of quite a nice one with the team, I think. If it was an event, I would pretty much always go with, oh, who are you looking forward to hearing from today? Or who are you looking forward to seeing today? Something to do with the agenda. It's not going to blow our minds, the response to that. But if somebody then picks out a topic or a person, then you sort of go, oh, I wonder, why is that particularly interesting for them? And it will probably get them talking a little bit about maybe the work that they do. And again, I can just make a bit of a quick connection. Or even as simple as, how's your week going? One watch out with that, I was watching an interesting Harvard Business Review video on small talk, is, when sometimes people just go, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And it feels like and you're like, oh, okay, back to me then. Back to me for the next question. I was sort of hoping for a bit more than that. No, I do think when I ask people that, it is quite rare that people just go, I'm fine. Usually you do get a bit more. And actually that's often quite helpful because you get a feel for, is someone coming to this conversation with stress, or they're so overwhelmed, or actually they're feeling really good because something amazing's just happened. So how's their week going? I think is a good question. I do ask it. If someone does just say, I'm fine, I will then often kind of follow up with going, oh, what's been particularly good about the week so far? I try and do something a bit more pointy to kind of go, and something positive as well. I would never say to someone, oh, what's your biggest challenge right now? Because that doesn't feel like a kind of quick connection. The one other myth that I'm not sure is true, so I was saying to Helen about this, if you read a bit of the research around small talk, there's this phrase that everybody goes on about. And I remember there being a real moment where I heard this a bit in training sessions, but I don't think I've ever heard it in real life. One of those things where you're like, does this actually translate? And maybe if you're listening and you're like, oh no, it totally works for me, you'll have to let us know. And I'm going to call this the tell me more myth. So what lots of the arguments are is that when people talk to you, if they're quite short in their response, all you need to do is just go back and go, tell me more. And I was like, who does that? I mean, A, it feels a bit like I'm putting that person on the spot. Secondly, I just think it's a slightly weird
Well, they sound like being
phrase.
interviewed, don't they? It's gone from this informal, quick connection to an interview. I'm like, why am I telling you more? Yeah.
Yeah. It actually doesn't feel. I can't ever imagine saying that out loud. I get the sentiment of you're trying to show you're interested and you're trying to maybe dig a bit deeper. But I'm like, but really, in a small talk conversation, I think you are making a quick connection. And as much as I would always probably start with a question, I think one of the things that I have to watch out for myself is you don't want to ask someone too many questions because, like you say, otherwise it ends up feeling a bit too much like, oh, I'm putting a lot of pressure on that person. So I think you have got to give a bit as well.
I think it's a bit lazy. Tell me more. Because if you said to me, if I said, how are things going this week? And you were like, yeah, it's okay. And I went, tell me more. I'm like, what I should say is I don't know. I would just ask a different, more specific question and say have you just come straight here, or are you coming from somewhere else? I'd probably change my question to see if I could unlock anything else. I do think, though, you do need to read the room a little bit with how somebody responds, because if they go, oh, it's fine, that might be just because your question hasn't sort of unlocked the connection that small talk can provide, or it might be because they're just not in the mood to talk, and in which case, move on. We're not trying to force a conversation with someone who doesn't want to talk to you. We're just trying to create a quick connection. But if they're just not in that mode at that particular time, then you don't want to make it awkward for somebody just because you're looking for connection. It doesn't mean that they need it at that moment.
I always think with these questions, you just want to make them as easy as possible for people. That's often why and maybe this is just me, but I think my questions do tend to be quite kind of in the moment work related. And maybe that's because of what we do, because we have a lot of filler moments. We're in this kind of couple of minutes before an event starts, or you're about to run a workshop, or just before you're about to start the podcast recording. So when I interview these two people later today, I can't just start the podcast recording because I've never met them before. So I've obviously you've got to talk to people first. But I think often, like today, I'll probably say to them, what other podcasts have you done? Or actually what I will say is I noticed that they know someone we know, Simon Ong. I will definitely just say that. Oh, I spotted you know Simon. I didn't realise. It looked like you had a really good catch up. Just to go, let's make a quick connection. And then, that feels very kind of relevant. It feels very in the moment. If it's an event, I'll always say to somebody who's organising it, like, oh, how's the event going so far? And they'll just give you like, oh yeah, actually, so far, I know usually it's going pretty well, and they can tell you some good stuff and you're like, oh, that sounds brilliant. I don't think you always have to ask people stuff that's personal, because I think sometimes people don't always want to share that stuff. And so I think I'm often more in the territory of going, ask about what's happening right now, or ask about work stuff. And then you sort of end up maybe sometimes in more outside of work territory. But yeah, I would probably more likely to ask like, what's happened at work in the last week, rather than just going, oh, what's happened in your life in the last week.
I think I probably would stray into personal territory, because it would just be, it's probably just more me to be like, has anyone done anything fun in the last 24 hours? It's just more my style to kind of do that sort of a question.
Whereas I don't think I do.
But in terms of the difference between Sarah and me, as well as like where the question comes from, like a personal or a professional one, also we talked about Sarah might lead with the questions, or kind of those low commitment questions. I often lead with what we're calling like a give to get started. So I will share something quick, like I did this morning. We had Pod Plus this morning. And there's like, I don't know, a couple of hundred people that join, and they join at different times. So I've often, before I start Pod Plus, which is our discussion about our podcast with that community, I might just kind of have a little bit of like, I always think about it as sort of catch up time, or just like, well, it's small talk.
Do you know what's so
time.
funny?
What?
Obviously, I do Pod Plus as well, but we don't do it together very often. I am trying to think I don't think I've ever done anything.
That's hilarious.
I just think I'd go into the content. I'm just like, right, so we're here to talk about this.
I don't do that at all.
I just get started.
I kind of go, hi everybody. And I go, before we get started, I know I look a little bit brown. It's fake tan. And that's because I'm going on holiday tomorrow. And I'm like, has anyone got any recommendations? Before we start, book recommendations, send them my way. But I am definitely, I'm a bit more of a random like way into a conversation, definitely, which again isn't always comfortable for everybody. But if small talk is quick connection, it is one way that feels authentic to me to create quick connection. So I will share a random thing like, oh, last night I did this, or oh my gosh, I don't know, whatever it is. I really don't know what it is, but I just share a sort of a random thing that's happened sort of in the last 24 hours or so. So it's very kind of the moment. And then I will often be like, oh, are you going on holiday the next like couple of weeks, or have you got a book recommendation, or oh my gosh, my technology just failed in the last meeting, don't you just hate it when that happens? And then I just often just share that little nugget as a way of kind of, I guess it's like a breaking the ice kind of thing, but then I'll often follow it with a question, but I sort of use my context first.
Well, I think what is good about your approach is that you are sharing first, so you're sort of encouraging other people to do it in return. It's also because I've obviously seen you do this, and again I look at it and go, well, I can't do that. I'm not like we were having the debate about like, would you ask about the weather? And I was like, absolutely not. With my kind of slightly more critical brain, I think it's fair to say, I was like, no, I don't want to know what everyone's weather is, and I don't want to talk about my weather. I'm like, it's boring. So it's just not in my kind of skill set to ask that question.
I love you.
But then, yeah. But then I've seen Helen do it, and I think why it works for Helen is because like she's fun and she's energetic.
I'll be
and
like,
people kind of go with
everybody,
her.
we've got 2 minutes. Rather than talk for ages about the weather, give me the weather in an emoji. That works because we will do sessions with like, a lot of people in them. And so very quickly, I'll be like, my emoji would be a rainy umbrella or a pair of wellies or whatever I could find. And then people, small talk in that way is as simple as an emoji. Like it's that quick moment
that's
of connection.
Nice. I can imagine doing that though.
Yeah,
I can imagine doing the emoji.
There you go. A weather emoji, one for you for the next one.
And so I think, some of this obviously comes naturally. I think it's pretty hard to predetermine exactly what you're going to say at the beginning of small talk. But I do think you can identify an approach that works for you. So I do think Helen is probably more likely to share something about herself. I'm more likely to ask a question. I think make it low pressure, make it easy. Number 2, when you are in sort of this small talk, or what are we reframing it as?
Quick connection
conversations, is just to ask yourself whether you are half listening or whole listening. So this is definitely something I recognise, is that when you are under pressure, you're more likely to half listen. And you're half listening because you are either anxious or making judgments, trying to find connections, panicking about what you're going to say next, and often for me, realising you've already forgotten someone's name. When you're like, oh, and then I'm beating myself up because I sort of wasn't, often because I am a bit nervous, and then I've like not listened, and I'm like, oh, for God's sake, Sarah, why did you not? And then you're just like, and now I've not listened to anything, or I've listened to half of what they've said. One of the things that has really helped me is I find that actually if I just go, well, my job here is to just, like wholly listen, like what is somebody telling me? And don't worry about what you're going to ask next or whether you can connect to that person or anything like that. Your only job here is just to listen, just be interested. Because then, that thing about like being present actually then obviously makes it easier to then make the connection, because then you hear the moments of, I don't know, excitement in what someone's sharing, or you sort of maybe see and spot some of the more subtle signals that someone might be giving you. Like maybe they're actually really nervous about being at an event and they actually say, well, actually I've never been to something like this before. And you might have missed that if you're not listening properly. But if someone said that to me, I would be thinking, oh, okay, so maybe this might feel quite hard, or maybe they don't know anyone. And maybe actually I feel okay here. Maybe I have been to these things a few times. I can be quite helpful. And so you can, I think if you listen properly, you're more likely to also hear the things that someone isn't saying out loud, and you're more able to spot those kind of quick connections. And again, I don't think this is a long thing. I think this is like in a minute, in 2 minutes, and just see where somebody goes in what they're saying to you.
I was just thinking about whether I kind of half listen or whole listen. I think my intent is always to whole listen to somebody, and you're not doing it for very long. But I think the thing that sometimes leads to me half listening is sort of what's happening around me. So like, for example, there was an event I was at this week, a typical moment. It was in like in the queue for coffee. Always a small talk situation, the queue for coffee.
Oh, yeah, that's another good one.
It is always, there's a queue for coffee. And so we're making a bit of small talk. And then we started having a little chat. I think it was quite an out of work thing we were talking about. But actually I was struggling to listen because we'd ended up stopping at the coffee. Like, so we'd been in the queue and then we started talking and then we'd stopped at the coffee. And then there were like people around us, like trying to like get to the milk or whatever. And it was really, I was kind of trying to be polite to these people and I felt like I wasn't like concentrating. And so I just said, oh, should we just move over here a minute? And I wasn't like trying to cage them into a conversation, but I didn't feel like I could listen to what someone was trying to say because, lots of people around me. And so I do think sometimes what's going on around this interaction can sometimes affect my ability to listen. And so I will say, oh, should we just move here for a minute? Like, oh, should we just get away from this bit if I'm having that conversation? Because otherwise I don't really feel like I'm fully, like I'm in it, because it's just, and actually they're distracted as well.
And so, I mean, one way you can easily like test yourself on this is the next time where you're like, oh, that was a kind of a quick connection moment, ask yourself a day later, like, what can you remember? Because usually if you're whole listening, you can remember a good percentage, let's say aim for like 75%, because actually it's very hard to remember all of it, but you might remember 75% of that conversation. So actually I was trying this with Helen when we were preparing for the podcast with somebody I met this week, and I could remember what he told me about his team, a bit about kind of what might be useful for them, and like some things, you know, we were just having a quick connection. This was in one of those moments, it was before a workshop was starting. He was introducing me. And so you are like having that slightly awkward, like, oh, hi, you're about to introduce me, but you've never met me. So that's always quite a weird moment. And then you do have to sort of make some small talk. And then he was talking to me a bit about kind of his team and what they were doing. And so I was like, oh, it was a good reminder of like, well, actually, because I really listened in that moment, I can still remember. And one of the techniques you can use in a conversation, I don't think I use it loads for small talk. See if you do, Helen. People say often about, if you've really listened, you can then paraphrase. So not parroting, you're not just parroting back, but you can sort of, you know, almost like say, you can kind of summarize, I guess, like kind of the key things. But to me, that felt a bit formal.
Yeah, I don't do that.
Connection moments.
No, I don't do that at all. And also because I'm trying to learn quite quickly and get lots of new information. I know I don't do that. I think what you have suggested, reflecting on small talk conversations, is actually very useful. So if I think about some of the small talk conversations I've had this week, there are some where I can definitely recall the detail of what was said, and there are some where I know we had some small talk and I probably can't remember the detail. And I think it's useful to think about what was the difference, and just without kind of naming the conversations in case anyone's listening now, but I do remember one, we were away from everybody else, so it was a lot easier for me to listen based on what I've just said. And then the small talk was particularly interesting because of something this person was doing, but it was just me and this person chatting, slightly distant to everyone else. And the other one where I definitely had small talk, but I actually can't remember a lot of what was said, was I think I was too conscious of what was coming next. So the conversation that we needed to have, I was a bit like, I need to make sure that was in my head. So I don't think I was as present in the small talk because I was mentally onto what is coming next. And so it's just interesting, I think, to just reflect on, you should be able to remember, like if you are fully listening, particularly within a week, like, you know, you should be able to remember a good chunk of what was said if you were really listening to a conversation and it's within the week of you having had it.
So then kind of final part 3, if you kind of want to think about it like that, is when to stop the small talk. Hooray. Obviously I'm joking, because it's quick connection, so it's all good. But I was thinking, I would love somebody to do this as an experiment. Maybe we could do it as an experiment. You know, if you timed the average length of small talk, you know, kind of what would it be? So we're talking less than 5 minutes.
I think so. I think like most of the time 2 to 3 minutes, that kind of length. 2
to 3 minutes. I think some of ours might be slightly longer, because sometimes we have to turn up, let's say 10 minutes or quarter of an hour before a workshop, and then, you know, sometimes you do have I think actually a slightly longer period.
I feel awkward when it goes on too long, you know, sometimes I'm like, I've run out of the good stuff.
I've run out. So I
bring out the weather emoji.
For most people it's probably like less than 5 minutes, but there might be some situations where it might be repeated 5 minutes. So let's say you're on a team away day, you might have lots of 5-minute snippets of small talk, right, with different people throughout the day. If it's an event, you might be doing it multiple times, but each small talk kind of segment is usually pretty short. And so then there's sort of 2 choices. You're either, depending on your situation, segueing from that kind of small talk, that quick connection moment, into a focused conversation, or you're stopping it and moving on. And so I think segueing is often just about what you signal and say out loud. So Helen and I were both saying, what do you say? Because we have to do this all the time. I will often use the word. So it feels like a good moment for us to get started. So we both said that we say the word started, or like start, which does actually sort of imply that the quick connection or the small talk
was not starting.
Doesn't count.
Yes, I know.
And I was like, I don't know how I feel about that, because obviously that can actually be really important when it's done well, I think. But I still think it is okay to just be like, let's get started. Or I also sometimes ask a different question. You know, when there's sort of a bit of a natural break, I might then say let's say we were meeting a new company we might work with, I will then like kind of wait for them to finish, you know, whichever kind of bit they're on, and then say, so what's most useful for us to talk about first today? Or what's most useful for us to focus on together now? You know, so you're like very clearly going, it's a segue, it's a bridge into kind of what we need to do. And actually, I did that this morning. Like, I was having some small talk chat with two people I'd not met before. It was really interesting because they like live in Australia, and I was like, oh, that's interesting to me. And we were having a bit of chat about, she was saying she'd taken her 3 kids on like a really long play journey, and I was like, oh, that's brave. So you're just having that kind of chat, but people talking a bit about their lives, which is really nice. And then I was like, and it felt like, when there's just that natural pause or silence, I think it can be tempting to keep the small talk going, but I think that is your cue. That is your cue to go, okay, now's the moment to segue, because it's quick, and that's absolutely fine. So I think that's one way to do, is like, just know if you're running meetings, if you're facilitating meetings, what's your sort of go-to to kind of make that move into whatever it is you need to talk about.
And then the alternative one, and I guess this is probably more, it could be like a meeting or an event, but it's that situation where you've had a small talk kind of moment with somebody, and then you want to move on, and it's not into the conversation, it's the end. It's not going to continue any more than that. Maybe you're going to, because you need to talk to somebody else, or maybe, you've got something else to do based on what your plan is that day. So you do need to end the conversation. And we were saying, like, in that moment, we think it is the best thing to do is sort of have a positive end. So, oh, it's been lovely talking. Oh, it was great to hear that. Or you kind of really made my morning, or any kind of positive end, but you don't want it to feel like, bye, and just go. That's just going to feel really weird. So you like conclude positively. And I think you just do that in the way that feels authentic to you, but just know that I always think, how do I want people to feel after having spoken to me? And I always want people to feel positive and energized as a result of having interacted with me in some way. So end positive in the way that feels right for you, and perhaps explain where you're going to. So if I was just talking to Sarah about some small talk, and I was like, all right, nice to talk to you, and I just left, even though I ended positively, Sarah might still be thinking, well, that was a bit weird. Does she not like me? Or, you don't want to create those kind of feelings. So I will often say, I'm just going to grab a coffee before the meeting starts. Or, oh, it's been lovely talking. Thank you so much. I'm just meeting a colleague over on the other side of the room, so I'm just going to head off and find her because I promised I'd go see her later, or whatever it is. But I will probably explain where I am going to, so it doesn't feel like I've just started a conversation then abandoned it. I don't think you ever want anyone to feel abandoned after small talk. That's like not a nice end to that interaction.
Yeah, and I don't think, if I was at an event, I would never leave someone stranded.
Oh yeah, on their own. So I have actually done that. Not stranded, that sounds horrible.
Oh, you're mean.
Well, no, but just because sometimes, no, do you know what it is? God, this does sound really mean. But I think sometimes people need someone to attach to, don't they? At an event, they need someone to attach to. And I'm often there to interact with lots of different people. And that's part of my purpose of being at that event, is to meet lots of people, or, whatever it is. And I can sense that. And sometimes I will, because I know it sounds, God, I'm saying it now, it sounds so mean, Sarah. Sarah thinks I'm so mean. But I will say it's been lovely. It's been lovely meeting you. But, it's because they haven't sensed the conversation's gone on too long. So sometimes I have had to say, definitely, I've had to end because the small talk has kept going and going and going. It's gone way past the 5 minutes. And I'm like, oh, it's been lovely meeting you. I'm just going to go catch up with a colleague. And, I'll leave that person to attach onto someone else. I know it sounds mean, but I have done it but after it's gone on a really long time. Oh gosh, I feel really mean now.
Yeah, I sort of don't know what to say to that. I suppose, I don't know. I think if it's gone on for a while, I would be like, well, is it now? Have we moved past the quick connection? And actually, are we just connecting? Because I think that's what happens with me. I think that's how I make actual, connections with a big C. And so if I feel like it's a good conversation with good chemistry, I think you sometimes within that conversation, it moves from a quick connection to...
I agree, but what if it's not that? What if it's just ongoing small talk and then I will have to end that chat at some point.
I think I would at least try and... I don't know. I think I've just got images of you leaving people in the middle of a big room by themselves. At least, I think if I was going to get a coffee, I don't think I could say that without saying, do you want to come and get one too? I just don't think I could do it.
But then you'd be with that person all day.
No, I wouldn't. But I would use that as at least I've given them a home.
The coffee.
I'm not going to be the only... But like I'm not the only person getting a coffee, right?
Okay,
There'll be other people there.
okay.
So at least
so
I've given
transition them to a coffee. Okay.
I think it's what I've got happening in my head around is that person just standing there by themselves. Or like, oh, shall we, probably going to grab my seat in a minute, but I'm just going to nip over here and be like, almost encourage them to like grab their seats. So, like just, I think it's the middle of the room by themselves thing that I'm finding harder to, and like, you see, everyone thinks I'm the mean one, but actually,
I am not
I think when
mean.
people... Yeah, well, we'll see what the listeners think when they listen to this episode. Imagine if you meet Helen now at an event, you'll be like, I bet you everyone will be like, oh my God.
Staring. She left them in the middle of the room.
I really, really hope that happens because I find it very funny.
It's so mean.
So if you're listening to this and you're like, right, okay, I really want to think about this, I would start by, first of all, maybe map all your small talk moments that happen in a week, because there will be loads more than you imagine. There'll be some that you're better at than others. So give yourself credit for what you're kind of doing well. Figure out how you're going to start a conversation. Are you more of a low commitment, easy question? Are you going to give to get started, as Helen described? Then just focus on listening. I think honestly, if you listen and you're present for those 2 to 3 minutes, it will go a long way. And I think often we are half listening rather than whole listening. And then start to figure out what to do in those moments where the quick connection needs to move on. It either needs to move on to a full connection, to the rest of the meeting, or you need to go and do something else. Kind of what does that look like? And I think just people, do beat themselves up about not being very good at this. But I think just remember that like lots of people would find this quite hard. And so you're probably better than you imagine. And if you did these 3 things, asked a curious question, really listened, and then don't leave someone stranded, then you're probably doing all right.
I feel like I'm going to get a barrage of emails now going, Helen, you're really mean. I'm not mean, I promise.
Or do you remember the time when you left me?
I don't. Well,
I mean, you told me as part of this conversation, I said, as an introvert, sometimes it's quite good if you go to an event with someone, because then at least like you can sort of do the small talk together. What did you say to me? You were like, oh, I don't want to go to events with other people. And I was like, oh, okay. So you were like, I don't want you to come to an event with me. I was like, okay.
But that is not
nice.
Quite, as someone who talked about the skill of paraphrasing, I did not say, I don't want to go to an event with you. I enjoy your company. I said, I prefer to go to events on my own, because then I could just flit around a room and meet loads of people. That's what I said. But I'm sorry if that comes across as mean. So mean.
Make their own judgments.
She's gaslighting me on the podcast, everybody.
So we hope that's been useful. A slightly different sort of topic today. We thought after we've done some probably a bit more reflective ones in the last couple of weeks around awareness and some of those kind of deeply thoughtful things, we were like, let's talk about small talk. But that's everything for this week. As always, we really appreciate you listening. Please do share and subscribe and do all the stars and all the good stuff, because actually it does really help us. We read it all and it means that Squiggly keeps spreading far and wide. But that's everything for this week. Thank you so much for listening. I'm back with you again soon. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.